Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. There's a story that's told that Yeshiva University was lamenting the fact that so many good, young, and vibrant academics, smart young men and women have been choosing to go to Ivy schools instead of YU. They're going to Harvard and Yale, they're going to Penn and Dartmouth. They couldn't figure out why. One of the members of the board said, I think it's because they have superior sporting there. So YU, Yeshiva University, decides they're going to create a rowing team. And that is much like what all the Ivies do, and it will attract so many of the students that are otherwise going to Ivies. So YU makes a rowing team, and it comes in last place in every single competition for a year and a half. So the rabbis huddle together from Yeshiva University and they say, listen, all these other schools seem to know what they're doing. Go and watch them practice. Go and watch them race and come back and report to us so that we can learn from them. So a rabbi with a beard and a hat, he puts on sunglasses and he walks over to Dartmouth, and then he goes to Harvard, and then he goes to Penn, and then he goes to Yale, and then he goes to Cornell, and he comes back and he says to the entire board and the team, I think I figured it out. What is it? He says, you see, on those rowing teams, one person yells and everyone else rows. We need to smile a little bit. It's overwhelming to me, shocking yet not surprising, why every time there is a tragedy, and the greater and more horrific it is, we as Jews and we as a community, we as a society, have what's called achdut, unity. We have all this bickering and fighting and name-calling, and you're not good, and you're not good, and you can't pray here, and you can't say that. And then these moment happens, and it gives us a shock to our systems. And we all sing from the same hymnal. We all are brothers and sisters. I lived in Manhattan on September the 11th, and I remember September 12th and 13th and 14th and 15th and 16th. There were no Republicans and Democrats. There were no right wing and left wing. There were no liberals and conservatives. We were all humans and all affected. And that is what this moment is right now for the Jewish people. It's what that moment is right now for humanity and for all of those that share a common set of values. At the risk of wagging my finger and saying, I told you so, from this very lectern, from this bima, at least on 3 different occasions, since November of 2020, I have preached and written about the grave dangers of how a civil society is incapable, even impermissible, but incapable of living in a post-truth world. I had written and shared before that truth for a civil society, truth for humanity, truth for the Jewish people is as core as oxygen. And when we deny truths, it is tantamount to taking away our oxygen, and we won't be able to breathe for much longer. In my estimation, in my streams of anxious consciousness, there are a few things that we as a people need to do in this moment to demonstrate our unity, to share in our chorus of a collective voice, and to rise up to this moment. As our brothers and sisters and sons and daughters are gearing up for war, so too must we gird up for a war that's happening on a different front. A war that's going to be happening in the print media, on broadcast television. It's going to be happening through every social media site you can imagine. And we have to get on the front lines of that. And we get on the front lines of it with truth. Just 3 days ago, one of the leaders of Hamas, from his billion-dollar palatial mansion in Qatar, proudly exclaimed, "We never targeted one civilian, we only targeted IDF people." Now, he uses that line and says it with a straight face. And it reminded me again of the dangers of imbibing a world without truth. Today, there was an article written that suggested that Israel was using white phosphorus, which is a chemical agent that explodes and burns skin, as one of their agents in the warfare that they are using in Gaza, which is ridiculous. It's not true. But any lawyers in the House know that there is a legal concept that one can say to another, and it goes something akin to, "Bob, do you still beat your wife?" And that when you present that statement, you have cornered the person you're speaking to into a no-win answer. If they say no, the implication is, of course, that they did. They say yes, then they're making an admission. But the real point of that statement is that they're always on the defensive. And what we have to do when the leader of Hamas or people in major news articles or any of the stations proclaim or even suggest these untruths is we have to put on our flak jackets and we have to weaponize our keyboards and our pens and respond. This is not a time for apathy. This is not a time for ignorance, and it is not a time to turn a blind eye. The second stream of consciousness that has overwhelmed me is the quick pivot that has happened to the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, there are two things that I need to bring to your attention. The first is the categorical moral difference between us and our enemy. And the second is the categorical difference between those who are loving neighbors and those who aren't. I shared this last night. For those who it's redundant, I apologize. Richard Engel, who's one of the reporters for NBC, showed a graphic image of a building that was bombed out in Gaza City and men pulling a lifeless infant out of the rubble covered in soot. I saw that image and I bit my lip to fight back tears. A baby, an innocent baby who had done no harm to the world. This baby had nothing to do with this conflict. It was born into it. This poor thing, this baby has a mother and a father, perhaps siblings, aunts and uncles, that will all mourn for that lost potential. And I don't know one rational Jew, I don't know one rational human being, I don't know one that would celebrate the death of that baby. Not one. But when I juxtapose that to candy being handed out in Syria, and to dancing that was happening in Ramallah, and Jenin, and Tulkarem, and to gassing of the Jews' celebrations in Sydney, well, then we're not just fighting a war on a front in Gaza, we are fighting a war of morality as well. And for any of you that think that this war of morality is limited to the state of Israel, I am sorry to awaken you that it is not. This idea that this is about Israel is just anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Israel or anti-Zionism. And we have a responsibility to be on the front lines with truth. as a positive disinfectant to wipe it out. I know what humanitarianism looks like. Hours after the Ukrainian country was invaded by Russia, unprovoked, this synagogue for 3 days was filled literally to the rafters with supplies for Ukraine. And we were just one of thousands of synagogues in the nation that did that. This synagogue got a group together where we had to turn people away, say, you can't come with us, as we brought thousands upon thousands of pounds of supplies to those who were displaced and those who were fighting. There are people in this room who stood with me when we were on the border, embracing those who had just come over with their children. There were people in this room who were with us when we crossed into Ukraine and saw the medical personnel who were giving first aid in archaic environments. And when we walked in Shemesh through the border crossing that led to Ukraine, it was littered with different organizations and countries represented, with food and with supplies and diapers and strollers and clothing that had come from synagogues and churches and good people from around the globe. That's humanitarianism. Humanitarianism was the opening of the door of Poland that absorbed 10% of its current population to these displaced people. That is taking 20% of its GDP to help establish nutrition and nourishment and education for these people. Poland is not free of rebuke today or in its history, but what it's doing, along with other countries that are neighboring to Ukraine, like in Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Vienna, Austria, obviously, and other places, is the epitome of what humanitarianism looks like. For those of you who haven't seen a map or don't know your geography, Gaza shares a border with another Arab Muslim country. It's called Egypt. And on that border, because of a treaty that was signed with Sadat and Carter and Begin in the 80s, the Sinai Peninsula, which is demilitarized, is wide open to create a space for these displaced people. They could have a tent city. Syria, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Yemen, they could all come together and bring rice and beans and food and shelter. But they don't. Why? Why didn't they? What connection do we in this synagogue have to Ukraine? I'll tell you what our connection is. Our connection at the time that it happened was, that sounds a lot like what happened to us. So we better do something because we got mad when the world was silent. The leaders of Hamas are sitting in one of the wealthiest countries in the world called Qatar. They're sitting in the protective embrace of billion-dollar palatial mansions and six-star hotels, claiming and asking for days of jihad without putting themselves in harm's way, of course. And all of those billions of dollars that they're sitting on, where did they come from? I've got bad news for you, people. They came from you and me and countries throughout the EU that have given humanitarian aid to the Gazans for years and have been embezzled. From Yasser Arafat to Mahmoud Abbas to Khalid Mashal to Hassan Nasrallah and onward. When people talk about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the blockade that has existed there, my question to them is as follows. For a blockade that doesn't allow food and medicine to come in, explain me this. How did you get 10,000 AK-47s in the country? How in the world did you get 25,000 rockets in the country? How in the world did you get RPGs in the country? How did that happen? And when your leaders cry on the television, we don't have bomb shelters in Gaza like in Israel, who is to blame for that? Who is responsible for that? Why not turn to your leadership and Hamas that cares more about using your dead body in a civilian outfit than it does about your future? Why not turn to your uncles and aunts and your cousins who live in all of the neighboring countries that are protesting and burning flags and say, on your oil richness, why don't you send us some help? And the sad answer is, and it pains me to say this, and this is not from my usual mantra, this is not who I usually am, but the reason is because they are more hell-bent on painting a picture and creating an enemy of Israel than they are on establishing a hope and future for the Palestinian people. Many have said it for years. If the Palestinians laid down their weapons, there'd be peace tomorrow. If the Israelis laid down their weapons, there'd be genocide on the sunrise. In that quiet that we had absorbed for so many years, we proverbially laid down our weapons. And as I heard from one scholar who deals primarily with war crimes in the United Nations, what happened on October the 7th last Saturday falls more squarely into the category of genocide than it does into war crimes. That's how grotesque it was. And as Secretary Austin said, I was the man who was charged with taking on ISIS. And what I've seen here in Israel is worse than what I saw with ISIS. This is not about Palestinian statehood. It really wasn't. This is about the denial of Israel and the Jewish people for a statehood. And I've got more bad news for you. It doesn't stop in Israel. My friend Shai Held put this in a way that hit me in the stomach. He said from 1800 until 1945, the world said, if the Jewish people would just have a state, anti-Semitism would go away. And then he said, from 1948 until 2023, if the Jewish people would just give back their state, anti-Semitism would go away. Let's agree, it ain't going anywhere. And we know what this is really about. My last moment of rage and upset that I'll share with you today, before giving you some marching orders, is that, and I plan on writing about this later, there was a video that had become viral in the last few days of an Israeli Knesset member who went to go visit the wounded in a hospital. Some of you might have seen it. And a few doctors and nurses and family members of the wounded screamed at this Knesset member and said, look what you did to our country, look what you did to our people, get out of here, you're not welcome, and screamed, and then the doctors started crying in their screams, angry screams, and forced the Knesset member to leave. And I was thinking about this video for the last 24 hours, it's been playing in my head, and as I was walking to shul today, it metabolized for me. The people of Israel have been protesting for 40 weeks. They had like a food poisoning inside of them. There was something upset with them. And what we saw happen now, and we will see this after the war plays out, is that they, the humanity, the people, the population of Israel, will spit out the politicians who turn this moment into theater, the politicians that use these moments before and during to grandstand, the politicians who talked about their toughness and were MIA for the last week. They will spit them out as a society. We've already seen that through that video. That's okay. Israel will do that naturally. I liken it much to when we eat something that is sick or raw or unprocessed. Our body feels terrible, and eventually we evacuate it because our body cannot handle it. Israel will do that in its time. In its time. But what frustrates me, and where our responsibility falls, is why in the world has this not happened to Hamas? Where are the civilians in the West Bank? Where are the civilians in Gaza that say, look what you've done to us. Look what you've created to this land. Look what you've done that we're pulling babies out of a building. Why are they not vomiting out this evil? And if they're not vomiting it out, then frankly, they're complicit. If so many of them are so innocent, then why in the hell are they allowing them into their kitchens and their mosques and their nurseries and their senior citizens' homes to establish stockpiles of weapons and to shoot off rockets from them? That doesn't make you innocent. That makes you an accomplice. It makes you a combatant. It makes you a terrorist. And if we in civilized society can be able to say no and vomit it out, why do we expect less of them? I started today by telling you that we all have to yell together. We all have to sing from the same hymnal. Outside, there's a small piece of paper. Looks like this. It's double-sided, has two different pieces of information on each side. The first is my recommendation of 3 things that I think every single Jewish supporter, not just Jewish person, but Jewish supporter, should be saying to any and every person. And they go as follows. Number 1, there is no equivocation or justification that can excuse the brutality and heinous murder of innocent civilians committed by Hamas. All of us, Jewish or not Jewish, the civilized world must say that sentence. The second sentence we have to say is, Israel has every right, and indeed an obligation, to defend itself, to defend its citizens, and to ensure that this terror can never happen in its country again. And the third thing all of us need to say unequivocally is that Hamas is responsible for the death and the suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza. The Jewish people do not celebrate the plight of the Gazans who are subject to the chokehold of Hamas. The civilized world must hold Hamas responsible for this terrible reality that Gaza is under. The news has already pivoted to the international crisis, the humanitarian problem that is happening in Gaza. And for many, they are caught in this terrible crosshairs of the world in which they didn't create, but they see what their silence has done. And I offer the following 3 on the second side. The first is about the border in which they share with Egypt, and that other countries should insist that Egypt open up the Sinai for displaced people in Gaza. The second is that the head of this snake lives in Tehran, and that for years, billions of dollars have poured into Gaza for weaponry, but not for hospitals or roads, repairs, or schools, and ask for Tehran to pay for the safe passage of all of the citizens of Gaza. And lastly, when Israel tells people that they need to evacuate, and Hamas tells them they need to stay, which one's responsible for the war crimes? Israel had announced this morning that there were 2 safe passages that the people of Gaza should take. It was also announced today in the news that those passages were bombed. What you will find out, I promise you, in the coming days is that bombing happened from Hamas, not from Israel. Because Hamas doesn't want them to leave. They need them as shields. They need to hide under the camouflage of innocent civilians. Which one is the war criminal? Which one is creating a humanitarian crisis? Which one is the problem? This is not a time for our silence. As we gird up to fight this war as well, let us be proud of our Zionism. Let us undo a button and show the highs and Jewish stars that dangle from our neck. Let us be proud to wear our kippah. Outside, when you walk out, you will see signs of an Israeli flag, their yard signs that say, "We stand with Israel." The synagogue bought 2,500 of them. We ask you to do 2 things. 1, take some for your yard and proudly stand like we did for Ukraine, like we did when there was violence against Asian Americans during COVID, like we did when there was white nationalist violence, like we did when there was racial inequity, to stand up for Israel and to not cower or be silent or be shy. And secondly, I want you to take them to your merchants and to your shops, especially the local ones, the family-run ones. And I always say every Shabbat when someone says, I'm sorry I haven't been here for a few weeks, I'm sorry I didn't come last week, I always say I never take attendance. I'm taking roll call, people. I want to know who's taking a sign and putting it in their window, and I want to know who's not. And you should too. This is a moment for us to stand tall. We can't send our children to go fight a war while we cower. I don't like doing this in Shabbat, but this isn't a regular Shabbat. The needs of Israel are going to grow exponentially. And another way that we're going to help this war is financially. It will be important and meaningful for our synagogue to support the state of Israel in the following ways: building a portable ICU hospital, sending in 2 to 3 ambulances, creating a post-trauma center for the children in the Gaza envelope to process and who are orphaned. I want our synagogue to lead the way on that. This is not a $5,000 or $10,000 project. This is $1 million project. That's how much our community is going to need to raise in the coming months to make a difference. We're going to need to do it from our community, and we're going to need to turn to our non-Jewish friends and ask them to be part of this also. But Israel needs to know when they're fighting this war, they're not fighting it only for Israel. I promise you they're not. Every soldier putting on a flak jacket is fighting this war for you and me who are Jews everywhere. I promise you. Because if we lose this war, it's not only curtains for the state of Israel, it's curtain for us as Jews too. And it's a scary moment that we can't allow to happen. I want to buoy us with a piece of hope. And the last thing is, if you do take yard signs, and you could do it on Shabbat or after, we're asking for an $18 donation for them simply to cover the cost of the sign. That's what they charged us. We don't make any profit from it, and any nickel we would make over goes to this fund. So you can send it to the shul after or later. If you take 10, 20, or 30, give them out to people. I went to Tenafly yesterday. Granted, that's a pretty soft target in our community. And someone stopped me, and I thought he was going to be confrontational. He says, what are you doing with those signs? I said, I'm giving them to people in the yard. He goes, I would like 20 of them. I said, I only have 3 left. He goes, I'll take them all. I want to give them and put them out. So I want to tell you 2 stories that will buoy you, and I'm telling you them on purpose. One of our members came in yesterday and got some signs, and she said, I'm going to Closter Plaza, knocking on doors. So she went to one of the places that our entire synagogue has benefited from, and that's Rudy's. And they said, sorry, we don't do any advertisements, no signs for anybody in any moment. And the member who had eaten there 1 million times like all of us went to the back and spoke to one of the owners. They said, this is terrible what's happening to your people in our community. Give me the sign, of course we're putting it up. That was a beautiful moment. About 8 or 9 years ago, the synagogue got a new landscaper. His name is Emanu-El. The name of his company is GB Landscaping. It stands for God Bless. He's also Guatemalan, so the G is Guatemala also. He's an incredibly hardworking man, a nice man, and the way that we got to him was that his wife, a beautiful human being named Astrid, used to clean our house. And he does patios. He did the patio at the synagogue. He did the walkway, all these things, and he does landscaping. He called me every day of the crisis to check on me personally. And he said, I want to come to the synagogue to do something. And he came Friday. And he brought with him a check. I said, what's this? He says, we need to do our part to help Israel. It was a beautiful check for $200, and I fought back tears. I gave him a very big hug, and I said, please take these yard signs and put them on any home that will, put them on your windows, and share them. He drove away. About 10 minutes later, he drove back. He said, I realized 18 is an important number in Judaism, and there's more I can do. And he added $1,800 to another check to give us $2,000. I assure you, Emanu-El's check of $2,000 to this synagogue to help Israel is tantamount to me giving $50,000. I assure you. I tell you that story for 2 reasons. One, You should patronize Rudy's, and you should patronize GB Landscaping, and you should thank all of those people that are making a difference. And anyone that puts the sign up, even if you don't get your nails done there, even if you don't buy your coffee there, you should go in and say, thank you for putting up this sign. We can't only wag a finger at those who do wrong. We also have to celebrate those who do good. And let's be a part of that. But the second reason I tell you is that because sometimes when it gets really bad, when it gets really dark, and we can't even see the people in front of us, when we least expect it, we feel something on our fingers. And it's another hand holding on to ours. And it lets us know that even though it's dark, we're not alone. And yes, there are bad actors in the world, but there are a lot of good ones too. And we cannot lose sight of it, and we cannot be unappreciative for it, and we cannot ever stop our resolve in it. May God bless every soul that is standing on the front lines to protect our homeland and our people. May God bless every Jew and every human worldwide. May God help eradicate this horrible cancer from our world called Hamas. And may we be a unified community in our moments of happiness, joy, and peace that surely will come as we are in this moment of darkness. Amen.